Good afternoon, everybody. As always, my name is JC, and welcome to my channel, Everyman's Thoughts. In today's episode, I'm going to break down Season 1, Episode 2 of The Wheel of Time. There are spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen the episode yet, please click that subscribe button and come back later. You've been warned, so let's get started. Although I enjoyed Episode 1, Episode 2 was a notable improvement. Without the burden of having to focus on backstories like in Episode 1, Episode 2 could focus more on proper pacing and character development. And let's hope this sets the tone for the series moving forward. Episode 2 starts by introducing a vicious new antagonist, Amon Valda, and the White Cloaks. In this context, antagonist means bad guy if you attended public school. Then again, now I probably have to explain context too, so let's just move on. They introduce Amon Valda with an air of brutality and just flat-out inhumanity. It's one thing to kill your enemies, it's another to chop off their hands and burn them at the stake while eating a baby bird in fetishistic fashion. I don't normally judge a good fetish, but that damn bird didn't do anything to anybody. I generally prefer more nuance in adversarial characters, especially if they're going to be recurring. However, in this case, I understand what the writers were doing. Despite their actual actions, the White Cloaks like to shroud themselves in divinity and righteousness. If you don't establish who they really are, the casual viewer may make the mistake of thinking of them as sympathetic characters instead of the other way around. Hopefully they'll circle back around and add a little more depth to Amon and the White Cloaks in general at a later time. As we move along to the river crossing, this scene is going to set the emotional tone and relationship dynamic for the rest of the episode and possibly even deeper into the series. From an outside perspective, this is a straightforward situation. You're on one side of the river and a vicious army you can't do anything about is on the other. Unfortunately, the ferryman doesn't think of it that way and thinks the raft is the only chance he has to save his family. Moraine then uses her magic to sink the raft because she simply cannot allow it to be captured by the Trolloc army and then used to cross the river. I didn't like some of the writing choices in this scene as I felt the problem was overly simplistic. Remember that when the scene started, the ferryman's family, or at least his son, was not home yet. He could have advanced that argument by stating, "Look, my family might not be home yet, and if I take this raft to the other side, the Trollocs will use it and leave, and thus my family may be spared." Now you have a situation with real tension. Instead, the tension is derived from Lan noticing that Rand was empathizing with the ferryman regardless. A few days later, these tensions boil over and Rand confronts Moraine and he's asking all the right questions. Wait a minute, what is our future? What is your plan? Either from injury and sheer exhaustion or the fact that she simply can't answer those questions, Moraine goes full Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men. She has no time to answer questions from someone who sleeps under the protection she provides, then questions the manner in which she provides it. Unfortunately, because the problem at the river crossing was presented in such a one-sided fashion, when Rand eventually did confront Moraine, it came off as petty and small. Thus, we were deprived of a scene that could have had significantly more dramatic impact. For what it's worth, I do think making Rand look small was intentional, as it appears they are purposefully pushing him into the background for future considerations. I'll probably have a different video on that later in the season. Besides the confrontation, there were a few other things at the campsite that were noteworthy as well. Easily the most important thing that happened there was when Moraine began to show Egwene her true power. You don't listen to the wind listens to you. This continues to put pressure on Egwene because pursuing that future will inevitably create separation between herself and her closest friends. Something else of significance viewers may have missed is the dream world. You may recall that as they sleep, they continue to have dreams about a hooded figure with red eyes sort of stalking them. This isn't regular bad dreams being brought on by present circumstances. This is in fact the dream world. In the Wheel of Time universe, the dream world is, I guess it's hard to describe, but another form of magic. I wouldn't call it a magical realm, but just a separate form of magic that is completely separate from the one power. There's a decent chance this becomes a bigger issue in the near future as we move forward. The last thing I want to talk about before we move on to Shador Logoth is Matt. If you pay close attention, it's becoming very clear to me that Matt is becoming the central character that binds the other ones together. Egwene has 1 foot forward with her future in the Aes Sedai. Rand still has 1 foot in the past, stuck at Edmund's Field, and Perrin is completely disconnected, still in shock over accidentally killing his wife. When the group first learned of the dream world and the hooded figure, it was only Matt that had the courage to step forward and confront the problem directly. When Rand and Moiraine got into that argument, it was only Matt who knew how to talk to Rand to move him forward. Again, in Shador Logoth, it was only Matt who knew how to talk to Perrin to show him a way out of his grief. When the group is traveling over the road, Matt looks around to see everyone dejected and immediately begins singing to lift their spirits. He also clearly has more savvy and perception about him than his companions, and I'm guessing that's due to the relatively sheltered upbringing of his friends as compared to his own. Considering what we know about these characters from the book, it's an interesting choice to put him at the center, and I'll be curious to see if this pattern continues. You know what? There was one more thing I wanted to briefly talk about before we enter Shadar Logoth, and that was Perrin's wolves. I missed this on my first 2 watch-throughs actually, and I'm guessing a lot of my subscribers did as well. If you look at the wolves in the far-away shots or the high-above shots, they're actually quite chill. Hey bro, got a pizza coming, wanna rock a case of Busch Light, maybe play some GameCube? But when you look at the super close-up, which represents Perrin's mind's eye view, the wolves are extremely aggressive. Hey dickweed, you put your trash cans in my parking spot again. I'm sure a lot of people were confused why it was that when the wolf got close, it simply licked his wound and bounced, and that's because they were really never a threat to begin with. It was all in Perrin's head. I'm willing to bet a lot of people watching this video were confused by that. I know I was the first time I watched it. That brings us to Shadar Logoth, and if you watch my videos, you know I've been looking forward to this more than anything else we're likely to see in Season 1. I've spoken quite a bit about this series and my concerns about their budget, but I want to take this opportunity to praise the creative staff behind the scenes. When you see a city that looks as good and feels as on point as Shadar Logoth does, you know they had to make some hard decisions, and it's obvious they made the right ones. Yes, there's been some mediocre special effects when Moiraine's weaving the One Power, but that pales in comparison to the folksy hometown feeling of Edmund's Field or just the epic and tragic feel of Shador Logoth. They made the right decisions as far as where to put their money, and they deserve the credit when it's due. As wonderful as it was to see this city brought to life on the screen, I was disappointed to see certain characters and plot elements omitted from the show and how brief of a stay they actually had within the city. That being said, there are a few things that are noteworthy. Once they entered the city, despite the warning they were clearly given, you notice that Rand was the first one out the door and disregarding what was said. This continues the development of his rebellious nature and denotes the gap that is widening between himself, Moiraine, and Lan. By contrast, despite the fact that Shadar Logoth is a place that was literally consumed and cursed by its own selfishness, this is where we see the four begin to move back together as companions. Matt reaches out to pull Perrin out of his grief-stricken spiral, and Egwene continues to try her best to mend the wounds between her and Rand, and her efforts this time are finally reciprocated. The irony here is, just as the group comes together on, say, an emotional or spiritual level, the curse separates them on a physical level. I don't think any of this symbolism was lost on the writers, and it was all likely very intentional. And last but not least, we of course had Matt finding the ruby-hilted dagger. This is a benchmark moment, and we should watch for any changes to his character as the show progresses. This is one of the things I was referring to when I mentioned earlier about how interesting it is to have Matt at the center of the group, and how that might change now that he has the dagger. I can't believe I almost forgot about Nynaeve. In the very last scene, we see Nynaeve holding a knife to Lan's throat and demanding to see the children. As a wisdom, she's been somewhat of a protector of them for their entire lives, and she's simply just taking that to the next level. Nynaeve's return sets up another interesting dilemma for Egwene. I told you, Egwene has a great story arc. Egwene loves Nynaeve and thinks of her as a mentor. Nynaeve hates the Aes Sedai and everything they represent. However, Moiraine has already made the Aes Sedai sales pitch to Egwene. Is Egwene going to gravitate back towards Nynaeve and becoming wisdom? Or is she going to move towards the Aes Sedai and what most people would say is a much grander future? Only time will tell. Well, folks, that's it for me this week. Please don't forget to hit that like or subscribe button, maybe leave a comment, and I will see you next time.